Federal prosecutors say a teenage girl flying from Anchorage, Alaska to Seattle, Washington ended up being seated next to a predator. Well, now the man who molested her during that flight, he's going to prison. We're sitting down with an attorney who litigates on behalf of sexual assault survivors to analyze these types of cases. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A 28-year-old man from the tiny town of Deininger, Alaska is headed for prison after prosecutors say he went to extreme lengths to touch the body of a teenager seated next to him on a flight from Alaska to Washington. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington says Trayton Ballot's incredibly inappropriate behavior happened on an Alaska Airlines flight from Anchorage to Seattle, Tacoma in January of this year. And instead of continuing on his way when Flight 190 landed, he was arrested. Okay? Got to talk about this. And to talk about this, the disturbing details in this federal complaint, I want to bring in John Clune, civil attorney who litigates on behalf of survivors of sexual assault. John, thanks so much for coming on. One of the scariest things about this is obviously where it happened, right? The victim was seated toward the back of the plane in a window seat. Ballot was apparently sitting next to her in the middle. Almost nowhere for this girl to go. Have you seen something like this before?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, some of these cases out of airplanes are becoming more and more common. I'm not sure that the behavior is becoming more common, but at least the reporting of it is becoming more common. And a lot of times it's that window seat because, as you mentioned, you're really kind of trapped there, particularly for, somebody of her age.
Yeah, trapped. There's nowhere to go, but also so brazen, right? That is a semi-public area. It's close quarters. You can hear everything. You can see everything.
Yeah, and a lot of times there are offenders that are attracted to these opportunities to commit offenses when there are a number of other people around them and they have the ability to get caught. It's part of the deviant mindset of some of these guys. So not surprising, but incredibly disturbing.
What happened? Okay, let's get into what happened. Well, once law enforcement got word about an incident on the plane, that's when the FBI took over the investigation. By the way, let me just start right there. John, is that strange for the FBI to take hold of this, or does that make sense given you're talking about an airplane?
Yeah, because, when you have cases that happen on, say, a, Amtrak train or a bus, you can use the local jurisdiction as the location for the prosecution and investigation. But when it's on an airplane, it's going to almost always be federal law enforcement and federal laws are going to apply. So that's normal.
Okay, so according to the investigating agent's report for the criminal complaint, it states, quote, the FBI has been designated as the law enforcement agency responsible for investigating crimes that occur on board an aircraft once the doors have closed, post-boarding, including interference with a flight crew or any physical or sexual assault. And again, it makes sense. The FBI investigates crimes that cross state lines and a flight would qualify. Then you go to January 15th. The teen, who's referred to as Minor Victim 1 or MV1 in the court filing, had a stranger seated next to her. The complaint reads, MV1, who is 17 years old, was traveling with her mother and a friend. MV1 was sitting in the window seat with Ballot seated in the middle seat immediately adjacent to MV1 and MV1's friend sitting in the aisle seat. About an hour into the flight, Ballot, who appeared to be asleep, moved his hand onto MV1's upper and inner thigh and began rubbing her thigh. MV1 moved his hand away. A short time later, Ballot again put his hand on MV1's inner thigh and began rubbing. Again, MV1 moved his hand away. A few minutes later, Ballot again put his hand on her inner thigh. MV1 again pushed it away. So, John, Ballot tried this again and again and again, and I wonder if the goal was, hey, I'm sleeping, I'm not realizing what I'm doing or where I'm going. Is that what the goal was here?
You mean to kind of mask it as though his hands are just kind of wandering in their sleep? Maybe. I mean, one of the ways that offenders can get away with their crimes is to engage in behavior that's not overt. It can be confusing to the victim. Is this person half asleep and not knowing what's going on? Should I make a big deal about it? Because if somebody just flat out, reaches over and sexually assaults somebody in an airplane seat, they're probably going to yell out. They're probably going to call for help. So if you engage in behavior that's a little more confusing to the victim, you have a higher likelihood of getting away with it. So that could be part of the motive.
And it can be uncomfortable calling the flight attendant over and starting a whole scene, but it's just so disturbing and so unsettling, and it makes you wonder how brazen it is. Do you think it is possible he has done something like this before and just no one reported it and he didn't get caught?
I mean, to use your word, it is such brazen behavior. It seems that it's unlikely that it's a first time. We don't know of any other instances, but it is pretty bold behavior, and that's usually a sign of somebody who's gotten to a certain level of comfort with committing offenses.
By the way, here on Sidebar, we talk about emergency situations a lot, but what we don't talk enough about is how to prepare so you can face anything with confidence. Did you know that falls are one of the leading causes of injury for older Americans? Yeah, 1 in 4 experiences one each year, and getting help fast, that can make all the difference. That is where Medical Guardian comes in. And if you think you already know what a medical alert device is, think again. Medical Guardian continues to innovate, making them sleeker, easier to use, faster than anything you may have seen before. They offer devices your way, around your neck, on your wrist, clipped to your belt, so protection fits seamlessly into your daily life. These devices work nationwide with 4G LTE and Wi-Fi, connecting you instantly to 24/7 US-based emergency operators who already know your name, where you are, who to call. They can send emergency services and notify your loved ones, whether it's a fall, a sudden allergic reaction, a car accident, any type of emergency. And with optional fall detection, they can even call for help automatically if you can't press the button yourself. So right now, Medical Guardian is offering our viewers an exclusive 75% off of their top-rated MG Mini and MG Mini Lite, because being prepared, it's not about fear. It's about living your life without limits, knowing help is always within reach. So visit medicalguardian.com/sidebar75, use code sidebar75 or DDS75 today to claim your 75% off. Does the airline have responsibility here?
They probably don't have legal liability here. They could have liability if there's some reason why they should have known that this was going on. Some of the cases that we see where the airlines have liability is when there was a report that was made to somebody and that report was ignored and then the abuse continued. That doesn't seem like it's the case here, so perhaps not.
Now, we looked into Ballot's criminal history in Alaska and Washington. And in November of 2016, he pled guilty to assault in the 4th degree out in Alaska. The exact details about it weren't available on the court website. But in July of 2018, he was charged in Seattle Municipal Court with harassment. There was no criminal complaint that was filed. It appears the case was dropped. And then in May of 2022, he was charged with violating a domestic violence protection order. That case apparently is still making its way through Alaska's judicial court system. John, an airline is not responsible for knowing somebody's criminal history and whether or not they should be monitoring them, watching them on the plane. How does that work exactly?
Yeah, I mean, they really don't, other than things that may put them on a do not fly list, which is probably more of a TSA issue. The airlines don't have any obligation to vet their passengers. I mean, they do have some obligation to be mindful and pay attention to what's going on in their airplane. But again, they have to have some reason to know that something's going on and then fail to act before they're going to, have any real responsibility.
We go back to this federal complaint. It reads, MV1 then placed a pillow on her thighs and put the tray table down over the pillow. Ballot moved his hand under the armrest and tried to place his hand under the pillow and over her thigh. MV1 pressed down on the pillow to stop him. He pulled his hand away. Now, the prosecutor's office clarified in a press release about Ballot's conviction that it was actually a stuffed animal she used, not a pillow, which is just another reminder that this is a minor we're talking about. MV1 then took out her phone, typed a message indicating that the man next to her had touched her, and got up to show her mother the message, who was seated in the row behind her. MV1 also showed her friend the message. Now, John, quick thinking. I think that it was really, really smart for her to do.
Yeah, and in general, it doesn't seem like 17-year-olds are the best targets for offenders that are looking to get away with things. I mean, this 17-year-olds are pretty high functioning at that age, but I give her a lot of credit for thinking of something, a discreet way to alert her mother without kind of blowing things up in a way that might have felt unsafe or scary to her, given the fact that she was kind of pinned in that position.
How important is it to have other people with her, right? Corroborating witnesses for a legal case? Because, if I told you that somebody, molested somebody on a plane, touched somebody inappropriately on a plane, you would think that seems so impossible. How on earth? There must be a misunderstanding here. And someone would do that. Unfortunately, as we'll get into, yes, these things definitely do happen. So is it very, very important to have eyewitnesses, corroborating witnesses, supporting witnesses there?
It is. And, most of these cases on an airplane, either you're traveling by yourself or you're not traveling next to people that are close to you. And so it is just your word against somebody else's word. The fact that she did that with the phone and shows it to her mother, that's incredibly compelling evidence. Like what's the rationale for why the 17-year-old is showing her mom this text message other than this actually did happen? So that was really important evidence.
Let's go back to the filing. It says, quote, her mother told her to let the flight attendants know. MV1 got up and tried to shake Ballot, who still appeared to be asleep, to ask him to move so she could get out of the row. He did not appear to awake, and she moved past him to get out of the row. Now, John, we know how small these airline seats have gotten, how close together people are. You can't really move, especially from the window seat. The other people don't get up, so it's like you have to literally climb over to get help. That's a really frightening thought.
Yeah, and I think at this point, fortunately, I think the gig is up. We have the flight attendant who's over helping her at this point. So, but it just is a reminder of just how trapped you can be in that window seat.
Then the report continues. Quote, she then found the flight attendant and reported what had happened. The flight attendant moved her to another seat. MV1 did not consent to Ballot touching her thigh at any point in the flight. John, we know the flight crew reported the assault to law enforcement on the ground. At SeaTac, Ballot was arrested. Was there anything else the flight attendant could have done?
At that point, I mean, you're not gonna restrain the person, and you're trying to maintain some sense of order on a plane. You got to keep in mind you have all these other passengers that are either don't know what's going on, or if they know what's going on, they don't want a scene. They don't know if this person's a dangerous individual. Is he going to react differently if he's confronted? So at this point, it sounds like the protocol was followed, which was to remove the threat to the other passenger, and then I'm sure they continue to monitor Mr. Ballot.
And what kind of training do flight attendants get other than, everything that goes into how to prepare for a plane and emergencies? Flight, is there sexual assault training? Is there other inappropriate behavior training in terms of when you're dealing with passengers who are unruly or maybe committing a crime? Again, sexually assaulting somebody. Do they get any kind of training? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It certainly seems like between sexual assault and all the other things that we see with unruly passengers that we all have the benefit of watching thanks to phones and social media. I'm sure there is, but I don't know what that is.
So Ballot was indicted on one count of abusive sexual contact. The complaint reads, Trayton Ballot did knowingly and intentionally engage in sexual contact with minor victim 1, that is, touch minor victim 1's inner thigh multiple times without minor victim 1's permission, and with the intent to abuse, humiliate, degrade, and arouse and gratify the sexual desire of any person. Does that feel like the appropriate charge based on that pattern of facts?
It does, yeah. And you notice that it's not sexual contact with any particular sexualized body part or reproductive organs, but any kind of contact of any nature that's done for the purpose of that sexual gratification is going to apply. So that is the right count.
John, according to prosecutors, this jury, they deliberated for about an hour before convicting him. Is that surprising to you?
It's short, but the evidence seems pretty strong here. So I'm not surprised, but it's a short period of time for a serious verdict.
Our understanding also is that this charge carries a sentence of up to 2 years in prison. If he were to get that much, is that long enough?
It certainly doesn't feel like it. I mean, you're sexually assaulting a child in a pretty bold and brazen way. Sometimes particularly with federal charges, keep in mind that normally sexual abuse cases are filed under state charges. So we have a whole different range of options and probably longer lengths of punishment under state charges, because that's just normally the system that we use for sexual abuse. Feds have fewer charges to choose from. And so this was, although the right one, may not be one that gives enough punishment for the crime, especially with the prior assault conviction.
Is this going to deter behavior like this in the future?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, what we've seen with sex offenders is punishment generally does not equate to deterrence. Hopefully there is sex offense specific counseling that he gets while he's in prison that has some limited benefit to it. But as much as anything, it's just a punitive aspect for bad behavior. Whether it actually fixes or prevents other assaults is probably less the focus.
And this is not an isolated incident. According to FBI stats from 2023, airport liaison agents, they opened 96 cases related to in-flight sexual assault. And earlier this year, a woman identified as Barbara Morgan filed a lawsuit against American Airlines, alleging that the company allowed a passenger with a known history of misconduct to sexually assault her on a flight last year. She says she was seated next to Cherian Abraham, who she claims groped her repeatedly. According to court documents, Abraham has a reported history of touching women inappropriately on airlines. The DOJ charged Abraham with abusive sexual conduct. His case is ongoing. Now, John, aside from the stats that are quite alarming, does this case feel different? Does the Abraham case feel different, where an airline could be liable?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the concept of, what's the airline's duty to make sure that people are safe on their airplanes. So far, with cases that have been out there, there's not been any finding that airlines have a duty to vet their passengers just generally before they're on their flight. So the fact that they have this prior history of conduct, unless it's, somehow on the same airline, then they're probably not going to have liability for that. But if, again, if there's something that the staff notices, like during the flight, and then they don't respond to it, then there can be liability. But it's certainly, the Abraham case is certainly a more aggravated series of facts given the history.
But that's not flagged by an airline, right? If you have a guy who is doing this on airlines before or has engaged in this kind of conduct, it's just not flagged. It's just not on the record. By the way, you dealt with a similar incident, but this was on a Greyhound bus, right?
I did, and it was at least she was 9 at the time, and there was a mom traveling with her 2 kids, and mom sat on one side of the, it's 2 seats on a side on a Greyhound bus. Mom sat with the one kid, and then her other kid was just across the aisle, so only about 1.5 feet away from her. And unfortunately, the person sitting next to that kid was a previously convicted sex offender who repeated his behavior on her.
And what happened? What happened with the case?
So it was an interesting case because we didn't know who the person was because it wasn't reported by the kid until later that night. But remarkably, they were able to find who the individual was. He went to trial and he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Similar type of touching to what we have in this underlying case.
And what about Greyhound? What was their take on what happened?
So they didn't make any statements. I was a prosecutor at the time, so I didn't deal with Greyhound. But I don't know that Greyhound had any particular liability there, but certainly a disturbing set of facts.
I don't know what's going on. It's crazy. It's crazy to be thinking about. John Clune, thank you so much for taking the time. Sorry this is the case that we're talking about, but clearly, unfortunately, you have experience in this area. You see this happening on different modes of transportation. Just everybody try to be safe out there. I don't even know how to prevent something like this. But John, thank you so much.
You bet, Jesse. Good to see you.
All right, everybody, that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram or X. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.